If it's Tuesday, the judge in Donald Trump's criminal hush money trial considers holding the former president in contempt for repeatedly attacking witnesses and jurors while slamming Trump's lawyers, telling them you're losing all credibility. Plus, another day, another split screen. President Biden hits Trump on the trail in Florida, tying him to sweeping abortion restrictions in the state and beyond, as the White House tries to ward off a number of potential political headwinds. One of them, rising tensions on college campuses over U.S. support for Israel, as pro-Palestinian protests at major universities lead to hundreds more arrests and new security concerns. Welcome to Meet the Press Now. I'm Gabe Gutierrez on another heated day in Donald Trump's hush money trial, as the former president and current presumptive Republican nominee's conduct outside the courtroom was front and center inside the courtroom. In a contentious hearing at the start of the day, Judge Juan Merchan clashed with Trump's attorneys in a hearing on whether he violated a gag order on multiple occasions by repeatedly attacking witnesses and jurors. In the hearing, the judge telling Trump attorney Todd Blanche, quote, "You're losing all credibility with this court," after Blanche argued that his client was attempting to comply with the order. Christopher Conway, one of the prosecutors in the case, dangled the possibility that Trump could be jailed if his behavior continues, telling the judge, "We are not yet seeking an incarceratory penalty, but the defendant seems to be angling for that." Prosecutors ticked through Trump's social media posts, campaign press releases, interviews, and public comments, all made since the trial began, showing how the former president has gone after two key witnesses in the case while questioning the jury's impartiality. Shortly after the hearing, he took to social media to attack Judge Merchan directly, posting, "Highly conflicted, to put it mildly, Judge Juan Merchan has taken away my constitutional right to free speech. Everybody is allowed to talk and lie about me, but I am not allowed to defend myself." And he continued to rail against the gag order as he left court this afternoon.
We have a gag order, which to me is totally unconstitutional. I'm not allowed to talk, but people are allowed to talk about me. So they can talk about me, they can say whatever they want, they can lie, but I'm not allowed to say anything. I just have to sit back and look at why a conflicted judge has ordered me to have a gag order. I don't think anybody's ever seen anything like this. I'd love to talk to you people. I'd love to say everything that's on my mind, but I'm restricted because I have a gag order.
We're now waiting on a ruling from the judge on what penalties the former president will face. And following that hearing, former National Enquirer publisher David Pecker took the stand for a second day. Pecker, a close friend of Mr. Trump, testified about so-called catch-and-kill efforts to keep scandalous stories about Mr. Trump out of the news, while publishing salacious stories about Trump's political rivals in 2016, like Ted Cruz and Marco Rubio. And for more now, I'm joined by NBC News correspondent Dasha Burns. She's been following the action inside court. And also with me is NBC News legal analyst and criminal defense attorney Danny Savalos, and Catherine Christian, former assistant district attorney in Manhattan and also an NBC News analyst. Dasha, I want to start with you. Today's gag order hearing didn't go particularly well for Trump's legal team. So walk us through what happened, and did the judge indicate when he may issue a ruling?
Well, the judge can issue a ruling really any time. He did ask both parties to submit any additional materials today or tomorrow. And this is something that we are all waiting on, because in the meantime, the former president can and already arguably has, according to prosecutors, again violated that gag order. And if there isn't a response from the judge, this could really continue to be disruptive to the proceedings here. It was a really contentious back and forth between Judge Merchan and Trump attorney Todd Blanche. You gave that kind of explosive quote there, saying that he's losing credibility with the court. But basically, in that exchange, it was that the judge kept asking Blanche, can you give examples of what you're talking about when you say that former President Trump is just responding to attacks? What are the attacks that he's responding to? And Blanche couldn't really give an answer. But the overall argument from Trump's defense is, look, people are coming after him. He is running for president right now, and he deserves to be able to defend himself. But the way that they argued that in court didn't seem to go over too well.
And Dasha, on his second day of testimony, what did David Pecker say? He was a pretty compelling first witness, no?
Yeah, and in some ways, perhaps the star witness even more so than Michael Cohen. He was the guy in the room. He was friends with former President Trump since the late 80s. Throughout the day today, they really extensively talked about their relationship and how from early on they had this sort of mutually beneficial relationship where the publications that Pecker was overseeing, like the National Enquirer, were incredibly interested in former President Trump as with, being a TV star, The Apprentice, all of that. And Trump would give access to Pecker, and Pecker would use the information that Trump gave him to juice interest in his publications. And that is what led to that ultimate meeting in 2015 when Trump decided he was going to run for president. And Pecker described a meeting with him, Cohen, and former President Trump, talking about how Pecker could help, how he could publish stories that were beneficial to former President Trump, negative stories against his opponents, and at the heart of this all, Gabe, that catch and kill scheme. Pecker saying that he would be the, quote, eyes and ears for Trump and Cohen, looking out for any women who might be looking to shop their stories around. He would buy those stories and make sure that they didn't see the light of day. And as we got to the end of the day, he just began talking about Karen McDougal and her story and their attempt to buy that story and make sure that it did not damage former President Trump.
Dasha Burns following it all, and the case takes a break tomorrow, then picks back up on Thursday. Dasha, thank you. And I want to turn now to Danny. So, Danny, if you were Trump's lawyer, Todd Blanche, how concerned would you be about Judge Merchan's comments toward you today that you lost all credibility? Not a good thing to hear from the judge.
Yeah, look, I do have sympathy, as I would for any defense counsel. Sometimes it feels like the world is against you, and that's often when the prosecution or the government has a solid case. And when they have a solid case, it can feel like you're just bashing your head against a wall. And that's made even more difficult when you have a difficult client. I mean, take this, for example. Todd Blanche, I'm sure, has been up till the wee hours of the night preparing his cross-examination exhibits, memorizing the facts. And yet today, because of his client's behavior, he now has to try and memorize what social media postings said what on what day. If I'm Todd Blanche, I'm getting really frustrated with my client because his activities are creating overnight more work for me to do when I could be getting ready for the case. That was one of the things the judge criticized Todd Blanche for today. And I really had sympathy for him because Todd Blanche was probably prepping his case. He probably wasn't prepping social media postings for a gag order hearing that never had to be done if his client had just remained quiet.
And so, Danny, would you take any solace in the fact that the judge reserved judgment on the gag order so far?
No, not likely. I mean, I think this is the kind of thing that Judge Merchan, the reason he put it off to the next week was, and he was right, by doing so, you roll together all the other future violations that you know are coming. But at the same time, Justice Merchan does need to make a decision because this is something that is an ongoing problem, and Trump is going to continue to violate it. I think it's a really difficult decision. It's not as clear-cut as you might think because gag orders themselves, their very existence, is constitutionally suspect. They're relatively rare. They don't happen all that often. And they always implicate First Amendment rights. So every judge must tread carefully because all speech is different, especially when you add in the context.
And Catherine, this is going to be a long trial. It appears Judge Merchan, as we've been talking about, is already losing patience with Todd Blanche. So what do you take away from today's proceedings if you're in the DA's office?
Well, the DA's office should be happy, but I can tell you they probably aren't. Why? Because why hasn't Judge Merchan made a decision yet? So he put the gag order hearing off from last week to today, and today he said he's reserving decision. So on that, they're not happy. But they should be happy at the direct examination so far of clearly, if not their main witness, one of their main witnesses. Obviously, it's arguable that Michael Cohen is, because so far the direct exam has gone very smoothly, and they've gotten some great nuggets out of Mr. Pecker, namely that from his experience with Donald Trump, he found him to be very detailed-oriented and almost a micromanager, reviewing invoices. So any defense that he was aloof and just let Michael Cohen do everything, the jury might if they believe David Pecker, might say, well, that's just not true, because Mr. Pecker said that Donald Trump is very detailed-oriented and he's a micromanager.
And Catherine, prosecutors have accused Trump of violating his gag order by speaking about potential witnesses, but they did not yet cite this interview he conducted just last night in which he commented on the jurors. Listen.
That jury was picked so fast, 95% Democrats. The area is mostly all Democrat. You think of it as just a purely Democrat area. It's a very unfair situation.
And Catherine, what do you make of that interview? Do you think this will just be another log on their fire?
Yes, it's another, I would argue, violation of the gag order, which prevents Donald Trump from making public statements about prospective jurors or jurors in this criminal proceeding. And you don't want a domino effect. You don't want one juror to find out about it and get intimidated, not want to show up in court, and then you have another juror. That's the whole purpose of this gag order, to stop the intimidation of jurors and witnesses, because that will affect the integrity of the proceedings. He goes after Michael Cohen, and some people say, well, Michael Cohen goes after him. Well, Michael Cohen doesn't have a gag order. And it's not really about Michael Cohen, who is not intimidated and really doesn't care and just wants to be on TV and wants to keep criticizing Donald Trump. It's about the other witnesses who might say, oh, my goodness, look what Donald Trump is doing to Michael Cohen. He might do that to me. I don't want to come to court. So that's the purpose of the gag order, to stop the intimidation of witnesses and jurors.
And Catherine, we talked a little bit about this with Dasha, but how effective was David Pecker today as the first witness for prosecutors?
I thought he was very effective on direct, though I should give everyone a caveat. You know, a direct exam can go wonderfully, and then you have an excellent defense attorney stand up and then destroy a witness on cross. So we haven't seen the cross-examination yet. I don't think Mr. Pecker will be destroyed on cross. He was very authentic. He is who he is. He's the former, head of the National Enquirer, which, according to him, just paid for he calls it journalism, checkbook journalism, made up stories. And he seemed to be very credible and honest. Now, obviously, I didn't see him, so I couldn't judge his demeanor. But from reading all of the reports about it and the kind of transcript, he seems to be a very solid witness for the prosecution.
And Catherine, you mentioned cross-examination. I want to turn now to Danny. Danny, how would you question David Pecker if you were the defense attorney in this case?
It's tough. I mean, they're going to challenge his credibility. They're going to challenge his motive. They're going to say, you're here, you have an immunity arrangement. They're going to point different reasons he may have to fabricate, maybe that he's afraid of being prosecuted himself. They're also going to challenge the publishing sort of independence of the National Enquirer. We already saw that in the opening statements, that the defense made the point that, hey, the National Enquirer makes its own publishing decision. Donald Trump doesn't have anything to do with that. The problem is that I think David Pecker would deny that if he's cross-examined about it. He would say, no, we do have some degree of independence, but when Donald Trump wanted stuff done, we did it, not because he ordered us to, but because there was a quid pro quo. And that's what he testified about today. That is a piece of the puzzle that I think is very helpful, that David Pecker benefited, although you wouldn't see it just looking at the arrangement. It looks like somebody just trying to help Trump out whenever he could. But instead, Pecker explained, look, Trump was a fantastic source. He's a good guy to have on your side. He provides information. So I was willing to get into this unholy arrangement because there was a quid pro quo. Everybody got something. The only thing I think I'd really focus on is that most of these communications were with Michael Cohen. So far, we haven't heard the rest of the direct exam, that most of the communications were with Cohen, and for a lot of these agreements, maybe Trump wasn't in the room. But all in all, everyone knows, the government and the defense, Pecker's going to be probably the toughest witness.
Well, Catherine, we mentioned that the case takes a break tomorrow, picks back up again on Thursday. Past cross-examination, where do you think prosecutors then go?
Then they might call either Miss McDougal or Miss Daniels or Miss Clifford. I'm sorry, that's her real name. I don't think it's going to be right to Michael Cohen, but they might. I would call Michael Cohen. I would just sort of want to get him out of the way if I was a prosecutor. And then, we start off with Pecker, who basically corroborates Mr. Cohen, and then follow him up with others. They are not going to reveal that next witness because of Donald Trump's tweeting about the incoming witnesses, so they will probably, like they did last week, only do it the night before. So I anticipate that the cross-examination from Mr. Pecker will be long, but he's credible. They're not going to really be able to shake his credibility. They're going to have to do other things with him to help their case.
All right, Danny Savalas and Catherine, thank you so much both for your expertise. We really appreciate it. And turning now to a dynamic we have seen more than a few times since this trial began. While former President Trump spends his day on trial, President Biden is on the trail, this time in his rival's home state of Florida, where he hit Mr. Trump on the issue of abortion, as a 6-week ban is set to take effect in the state in just over a week.
There's one person responsible for this nightmare, and he's acknowledged and he brags about it, Donald Trump. Now he's worried the voters will hold him accountable for saying he's responsible for getting Roe v. Wade overturned. Donald Trump is worried voters are going to hold him accountable for the cruelty and chaos he created. Folks, the bad news for Trump is we are going to hold him accountable.
That 6-week ban will effectively cut off abortion access for millions of women in the southern United States. And it comes as the Biden campaign is hoping the issue will supercharge turnout this November, not just in Florida, but also Arizona. The issue will be on the ballot in both states, giving voters the chance to effectively overturn two of the strictest abortion bans in the country, as they also cast a ballot for president. NBC polling shows abortion is one of the few issues where President Biden holds an advantage over Mr. Trump, and 19% say they'd vote for or against the candidate based solely on that issue. And joining me now from Tampa, Florida, where the president just spoke, is NBC Washington correspondent Yamiche Alcindor. Yamiche, so good to have you here. And it has been the vice president, as you know, in the forefront of the reproductive rights message. So why have the president himself front and center today?
Well, it is a key issue because the vice president has held a number of events, more than 80 since the overturning of Roe v. Wade. But really, the president wanted to lean in today. Now, there are some who are telling me who are close to the president who say it's because he feels passionately about the issue. He has been a vocal supporter of abortion rights. But there's also, of course, the politics of this. As you laid out, abortion seems to be a winning issue for him. It's also a top motivating issue for voters across the country. And today, he wanted to make sure that he was attacking Donald Trump by name, that because this was a campaign event, he could be a little looser. He could be a little bit more biting in his words, officials tell me. And he laid the blame solely on Donald Trump, saying that this is not a states' rights issue, this is a women's rights issue. So over and over again, he said that voters should hold the former president accountable. And of course, it's notable that he's doing this not only because there is a 6-week ban that's going to go into effect here in the next week or so, but also because this is Donald Trump's home state. This is where he would likely be if he wasn't on trial in New York. Gabe?
And you've been speaking with voters there on the ground in Florida, Yamiche. How is the message being received down there?
Well, people who are supporters of abortion rights really welcomed President Biden coming here. They said that Florida feels like ground zero for this fight on abortion rights right now because of that 6-week ban. So I talked to a number of women who said they were so happy to see the president himself come down here. But I also, of course, talked to opponents of abortion rights. And one man told me that he really sees this all as sort of political rhetoric and political jockeying. He is, though, nervous about a ballot measure that's going to take effect here in November. Voters are going to be able to vote whether or not they want to expand abortion rights. And anti-abortion activists told me this morning that they really want to see abortion clinics closed in Florida. They said their ultimate goal is to make abortion unthinkable. So there are people here in Florida who are also not happy that the president came today, Gabe.
And Yamiche, we're just looking at some pro-Palestinian protesters. There was some video of them earlier today. And the president is leaning into his strongest issue, abortion, as the campaign is also trying to shy away from one of his weakest, that issue of how he's handling the Israel-Hamas war. So how is the Democratic backlash over that affecting how the campaign thinks about President Biden on the trail?
Well, Gabe, it's an important issue. Of course, both of us have covered how this war is impacting the way that the president is being seen by a number of people in his base. And this is really impacting, in particular, what could be his commencement address at Morehouse College. That college is set to announce that he's going to be delivering the commencement address. But there are faculty members that are now voicing concern of whether or not there are going to be protests against President Biden when he comes to that college campus. So it's really interesting. We have some good digital reporting up online at NBCnews.com taking through this issue. There's going to be a meeting where faculty are going to be able to sort of talk about their concerns with the president coming here. here. And it's really remarkable when you think about the fact that there's now a meeting about whether or not him going to Morehouse College, whether or not that's going to be something that's too raucous for that campus, because we know often springtime commencement addresses, that's when you see the president, the vice president, other surrogates talking to young people. But in this case, it could be a liability. You could, in fact, see protests and possibly even embarrassing protests for the president. So this is an issue that continues to be a vulnerability, and one that, of course, we'll both be following, I'm sure, Gabe.
Yeah, that's right, Yamiche. You know, certainly if a Democratic candidate is having trouble or controversy going to college campuses, could prove quite a challenge as his campaign ramps up. Yamiche Alcindor in Tampa. Yamiche, thank you so much. And coming up, tensions are rising on campuses at some of America's most elite universities, as Yamiche alluded to. Protests are intensifying over Israel's war against Hamas, and we're live at Columbia University, one of the hotspots for the unrest. Straight ahead. Plus, new fallout in U.S.-Israel relations as the IDF faces allegations of human rights abuses in the West Bank and potential U.S. sanctions in response. You're watching Meet the Press Now. And welcome back. The discord over the ongoing Israel-Hamas war is growing louder by the day, especially on college campuses across the nation. Those protests now spreading from coast to coast, with pro-Palestinian encampments being set up at dozens of colleges, all calling for their universities to divest from companies that provide weapons to Israel. The demonstrations also playing out as Jewish students mark the Passover holiday. Those growing anti-war demonstrations here at home comes as the U.S. State Department released its annual human rights report, which cited several reported human rights violations being committed in the region by Israel, Hamas, and other Palestinian militant groups. Yesterday, Secretary Blinken denied the suggestion that the U.S. has a double standard for Israel when it comes to examining such violations. And that report comes as the administration considers new sanctions on a battalion unit of Israel's military tied to human rights abuses. For more on that and the latest in the war and the U.S. response, I'm joined now by NBC News international correspondent Josh Letterman. Josh, thank you so much for joining us. And the U.S. is expected to impose sanctions on that ultra-Orthodox unit of Israel's military. So how much pressure is the Israeli government putting on the U.S. to change course? And could this further strain the relationship between President Biden and Prime Minister Netanyahu?
So much pressure, Gabe, that they're trying to preempt it. It's pretty rare to see a government come out swinging against something that another government hasn't even done yet. But that's what the Israelis are doing, based on essentially a leaked report saying that the U.S. intended to sanction this unit of the Israeli military. And as far as how this could affect U.S.-Israel relations, I mean, they're pretty bad already. It's hard to see how they could get that much worse. But it is fair to say that there's some irony in the fact that this is coming just after the U.S. came to the defense of Israel during those Iran strikes. The U.S. military shooting down huge numbers of Iranian drones and missiles launched towards Israel. And so while the Biden administration may have earned back some of its good graces from the Israeli government in doing so, I think the Biden administration feels comfortable now that they can say, look, nobody can question our credibility on coming to Israel's defense, but we are also going to stand up when we feel like a military that we are directly funding and assisting may be committing human rights violations, at least in some parts of the military that are operating in the occupied West Bank.
Yeah, Josh. And meanwhile, an independent review announced their findings about Israel's claim that some UN aid workers were linked to militant groups. What did they find, and will this allow UNRWA to boost its operations in the Gaza Strip?
Yeah, so to be clear, this review in particular didn't focus on those allegations that a dozen or more UNRWA employees were actively involved in the Hamas terror attacks of October 7th. Instead, this looked more broadly at allegations of bias within UNRWA. And what this UN investigation found was that the Israelis never put up any evidence to substantiate their allegations that UNRWA is essentially become beholden to Hamas. Now, there are going to be additional investigations into those other allegations, but in the meantime, 10 of the nations that had cut off funding to UNRWA in the wake of those allegations have now restored funding. So that may help UNRWA continue to be able to do the important work that it does on the ground in Gaza. But notably, the most significant and largest funder to UNRWA, the United States, has not yet resumed that funding. Gabe.
Josh Letterman, thank you so much. And as we mentioned, student protests tied to the ongoing war have spread to college campuses across the country, putting renewed pressure on administrators as well as government officials. Last night in New York City, police officers clashed with protesters at NYU, where more than 100 students were arrested. According to Mayor Eric Adams, NYPD officers had bottles and even a chair thrown at them as they tried to disperse the crowd. It follows protests that largely began at Columbia University last week, which also resulted in the arrest of dozens of students. My colleague Lester Holt sat down today with FBI Director Christopher Wray, who discussed the current environment on college campuses and raised concerns about the increase in anti-Semitic threats.
There's an environment right now we're seeing play out on some college campuses, the protests over what's happening in Gaza. Are you watching that warily? Are you concerned about threats emanating from these demonstrations?
Well, of course, demonstrations themselves are not something that we, the FBI, get involved in. But when violence ensues, that's when we get concerned, when you have threats of violence. And so we have seen, even before October 7th, we saw a significant increase, especially in anti-Semitic threats and anti-Semitic violence. And since October 7th, that number has gone up quite substantially.
Are you actively monitoring these protests?
We don't monitor protests, but we do share intelligence about specific threats of violence with campuses, with state and local law enforcement, but we don't monitor protests.
And you can catch more of Lester's exclusive interview with Director Wray tonight on NBC Nightly News. And joining me now from outside Columbia University's campus is NBC News correspondent Valerie Castro. And Valerie, these protests at Columbia have been about urging the university to divest from companies that provides weapons to Israel. And as we watch demonstrations spread now to other college campuses, is that still the core issue for these pro-Palestinian students?
Yeah, Gabe, that continues to be the central demand for the protesters, for the people who have set up those encampments. And actually, earlier today, there was a rally held at Washington Square Park in Lower Manhattan that's near New York University. That rally was in response to arrests made at NYU last night. And the protesters there today were rallying and saying, "We will not rest until you divest." So that certainly continues to be the core issue. They say those encampments will remain until that demand is met. Earlier this afternoon, university officials here at Columbia held a virtual press briefing. They say one of their main concerns is that people who seem to be behind the most disruptive actions during these protests appear to be people who are not affiliated with the university. They don't attend school here. They are not students. So they say that is one of their gravest concerns. But they say protests on campus by students are allowed. What is not allowed is the intimidation of other students or the disruption of classes. Take a listen to what they said just a short time ago.
There have been acts of vandalism on our campus since the protests began, reports of harassment and discrimination. The current protest is in violation of university rules. Full stop.
Gabe, another concern is graduation here at Columbia University. It is less than a month away. Traditionally, the main commencement ceremony happens in the area of the campus where that encampment is currently set up. We have reached out to the university to see if their plans for commencement have changed in any way. We are still waiting to hear back. Gabe.
And also, Valerie, Columbia University's president also facing intensifying calls for her resignation. What's the latest on that, and how's she responding?
There were several U.S. House Republicans from New York yesterday. They drafted a letter calling for her to step down. In the letter, they say she has failed to provide a safe learning environment and say anarchy has engulfed the campus. Again, calling for her to resign. So far, she has not responded to those calls, Gabe.
And Valerie, quickly, we also heard from Mayor Eric Adams today, a day after hundreds of NYU protesters were arrested, as you mentioned. How is he handling the situation, and what level of coordination is there between the mayor's office and the universities?
So the mayor echoed some of the sentiments that the university had earlier today, concerns that these are people unaffiliated with the universities that are causing the most problems. He called them outside agitators. He urged not just Columbia University, but leaders at other colleges to also meet with the city, to meet with NYPD to discuss best practices for continuing to handle this situation as it moves forward. Gabe.
Valerie Castro, New York. Valerie, thank you. And up next, critical aid for Ukraine and Israel, along with a law to force the sale of TikTok, clears its first major hurdle in the Senate as it inches closer to the president's desk. We're live on the Hill with the very latest. Next, you're watching Meet the Press Now.
Colleagues on both sides of the aisle who dismiss the value of our allies and partners ignore what history teaches about times when we lacked such friendships. Will the Senate indulge the fantasy of pulling up a drawbridge? Will we persist in the 21st century with an approach that failed in the 20th? Or will we dispense with the myth of isolationism and embrace reality?
Welcome back. That was Senate Minority Leader Mitch McConnell, of course, slamming the isolationist stance of some of his colleagues as the Senate considers the $95 billion aid package passed by the House this weekend. That package includes funding for Ukraine, Israel, and the Indo-Pacific, as well as a bill to force the sale of TikTok from Chinese owner ByteDance. And it overwhelmingly passed its first procedural hurdle this afternoon in an 80-19 vote. And joining me now from Capitol Hill Live is NBC's Ryan Nobles. And Ryan, what's the latest from this Senate vote, and how likely is all this expected to wrap up by the end of the day?
Well, the overwhelming vote that you pointed to there, Gabe, on that procedural motion is a good indication that this could wrap up at some point today. They're in a period now where the senators have up to 30 hours to debate this measure before it comes to a final vote. Now, it is very unlikely that they take up all 30 hours of that debate, especially because it looks as though this measure is going to pass easily. So we do anticipate that there'll be some sort of a final vote sometime tonight, either in the early to late evening. But it seems very clear that this package, which at one point seemed impossible, that it would never pass, is likely to become law by the end of the week. And Ukraine could see funding flowing in their direction in the very near future.
So it could potentially be a late night for you, Ryan, and your colleagues, as we just saw those live pictures of the debate on the Senate floor. And Ryan, we also heard those sharp words from McConnell. What kind of opposition is he facing from Republicans, and how much of that is about the policy versus the process?
You know, what's interesting about all of this, Gabe, is that Mitch McConnell, to a certain extent, is banging his chest in victory. And he actually made the argument to us, you heard him on the floor there, but also in a subsequent press conference, that the way that this process played itself out is an indication that his Republican colleagues are backing away from these loud voices that are calling for an isolationist foreign policy. He actually believes that he's been successful, that he and his Republican colleagues who believe that the United States has to have a more forceful approach to defending democracy around the world are actually winning the argument. He points to the fact that they were able to bring over about half of the Republican caucus on the House side, and that more senators voted for this particular package this time around than they even did the first time that the Senate passed a package along these lines. He pointed back to what happened in the lead up to World War II, and he said how America sat on the sidelines right up until the Pearl Harbor bombing before they finally got involved. And he warned that that cannot happen this time around, that while during that World War II era, the United States had only two big principal allies in Germany and Japan. Now he points to at least three when it comes to Iran, China, and Russia. He believes that this is a pivotal moment for America to use its force for power and for good. He pointed back to the Reagan doctrine of peace through strength, and he believes that he is winning that argument.
And Ryan, before I let you go, if I can ask you quickly about Speaker Johnson. Former President Trump appeared to defend him yesterday amid threats to his job. And so will that appease Marjorie Taylor Greene when the House returns?
Yeah, and so did Mitch McConnell. He also agreed that it's time for that faction to back off. We're not going to know the answer to that question for sure, Gabe, until next week. But there is no doubt that President Trump coming out and at least giving some tepid support to Mike Johnson should prevent this kind of avalanche of opposition from conservative Republicans. It's not a guarantee, though, because it only takes a couple of them to force that motion to vacate. That would still likely mean he needs Democrat support. So this still remains an open question going into next week.
Ryan Nobles live for us on Capitol Hill. Ryan, thank you. And turning now to some major legal developments for victims of disgraced sports physician Larry Nassar. The Justice Department announced today a $137.8 million settlement with the victims, coming after years of internal probes concluded that the Indianapolis FBI did not alert the necessary channels and offices about Nassar during its investigation. Multiple sources familiar with the settlement negotiations described the 2 years of talks leading to today's settlement as long and complex. Nassar, the 60-year-old convicted sex abuser, is currently set to serve his prison sentence through 2068, meaning he will likely be behind bars for the rest of his life. And after the break, new reporting on the Trump campaign's concerns that Robert F. Kennedy Jr.'s third-party bid could end up hurting them in November. The panel's next. You're watching Meet the Press Now. And welcome back. Turning now to the presidential race. We've heard Donald Trump say time and time again that he's confident Robert F. Kennedy Jr. will take votes from President Biden, not him, this November. But according to new reporting from NBC News, that's not the entire story. My colleague Alan Smith reports that Trump is privately unsure of how Kennedy would affect the race and has asked people if Kennedy's run is a good or bad thing for his candidacy. Our latest NBC News poll had Donald Trump up 2 points on President Biden in a head-to-head matchup, and that, of course, is inside the margin of error. But when we expanded to a 5-candidate field, it was President Biden up 2 points, also inside the margin of error, but with Robert F. Kennedy Jr.'s support seemingly coming from Trump supporters. And check this out. Our crosstabs found that 15% of Trump supporters went over to RFK Jr. when the field expanded, compared to just 7% of Biden supporters. And joining me now on set is the panel. Rhonda Colvin, senior reporter from the Washington Post, Maria Teresa Kumar, president and CEO of Voto Latino and an NBC News contributor, and Hogan Gidley, former press secretary on the 2020 Trump campaign and former deputy press secretary in the Trump White House. Thank you all so much for joining me here. And Rhonda, I want to start with you. So it looked like Democrats were going to have to be worried about RFK Jr., but based on this latest polling, should Republicans be more worried?
It appears that way, but these things can always fluctuate. But one thing that has been standing out to me while looking at some of the primary states that have gone on after Haley has dropped out is that it appears that there is a slice of the Republican electorate that wants to consider another candidate. So this somewhat is not that surprising that you do have people who are still trying to figure out their choices in the Republican Party, and they're landing on RFK, or at least see him as a favorable option to Trump.
And why do you think that is? Do you think there's some overlap between some of the issues that the Trump supporters and the RFK supporters?
There could be. You know, it's widely reported that RFK has a stance on being an anti-vaxxer, so that might be appealing to those in the Republican base who feel that same way. Also, and I know this from talking to voters on the trail, a lot of people who like Trump, it's because he is that outsider. That's how he won in 2016. So despite RFK's last name, he is an outsider. And that is what appeals to a lot of voters who may not want Trump or Biden.
That's right, an outsider with a Kennedy last name. Strange times we live in. Now, Hogan, I want to turn to you. And I want to play something of what Trump said in a video he released this month about RFK. Let's listen.
RFK Jr. is, as you know, the most radical left candidate in the race. He's more so than the Green Party. He's more so than even crooked Joe Biden. But he's got some nice things about him. I happen to like him. Kennedy is a radical left Democrat and always will be, but he's a better man than Joe Biden, that I can tell you. It's great for MAGA. I hope he continues to run. He is crooked Joe Biden's political opponent, not mine.
So, Hogan, which is it? He's attacking him, but he's praising him, saying nice things about him. Does his strategy work?
You act surprised as though that never happens with Donald Trump. Listen, I think there's some things at play here that need to be fleshed out. I was looking on Twitter before we came on, and someone was saying that on the left was saying that RFK was actually ultra-radical MAGA. So this is interesting. So the right is saying he's a radical leftist. The left is saying he's radical MAGA. It's a long time until November. We're going to have this fight for a while. But I really don't pay attention too much to the polling on this matter, at least at this point. What I'm most focused on, actually, is really the media writ large and the left. They're very angry about an RFK run, which tells me they're really concerned about who RFK will pull away from Joe Biden. Not to mention the fact that DNC hired two operatives that were really focused on making sure RFK isn't on the ballot in a lot of these states, showcasing the concern they had still for that Kennedy name and that Kennedy brand.
So, Maria, I want to ask you about that. You know, the DNC has been taking this Kennedy candidate very seriously, according to the reporting, beefing up staffing and whatnot. Should Democrats be that concerned about RFK Jr.? And do you think what they've done so far is working?
I think that they should be concerned. I'd be interested to see where who was pulled and where. We just came out of a series of focus groups just last week, and we're finding an interest in third party or sitting it out. Some mention of RFK is Nevada and Arizona among younger voters. And what we're finding, though, is when we start unpacking why the interest in third party is that right now, in this moment in time, neither party is resonating with them. If you were to ask, even around the issue of abortion, and this was fascinating, part of the focus group was among young Latinas, Gen Zers. All of them cited abortion as an issue they really cared about. None of them could cite which party was trying to suppress their access to abortion. Here in Washington, D.C., that's the only headline we hear. But the fact that low propensity, low information voters don't recognize that we're basically living in a two political system. You either vote for a Republican or a Democrat. Anything for third party basically splits the vote. And so one of the things coming out of it is we actually have to do much more education writ large for the American people to recognize what that means, whether it's Jill Stein, whether it's RFK, what that vote for that third party actually means.
Yeah, so many issues as this campaign moves forward. But Hogan, I want to turn to the thing that's really sucking up a lot of the oxygen right now. This trial in Manhattan, Donald Trump lashing out against the judge. He saw the hearing over the gag order today. Is that a good campaign strategy? I know the thinking was that, oh, well, he's getting up all the media attention, but is going after a judge and potentially witnesses, do you think that that is a good campaign strategy for a general election?
Well, look, there's a difference between the political strategy, of course, and the legal strategy, as you well know. To this point, it's been very positive for him to go after the people who are weaponizing the judicial branch, for example, three-letter agencies, the federal government against him.
Politically.
Politically, of course. And lashing out, I would take issue with the term. The fact is, this judge obviously is a donor to Joe Biden. His daughter has made millions of dollars pushing Democrat causes and candidates. So
he would take issue with that.
Yes,
she has been involved before, but she doesn't have anything directly to do with its case.
Right, but she makes money off of Donald Trump being in court as she pushes those emails out. Even if he could be completely unbiased in this as a judge, just the thought, the appearance of impropriety, you'd think he'd want to go, you know what, I'm going to sit this one out and let someone else do it. The American people don't like the thought of the judicial system being unfair, regardless of who is in the crosshairs of the system. And so it's worked well for him so far. We're going to have to wait and see. But it seems like every day is like up for him, down for him, up for him, down for him. And like I said, long time till November.
And Rhonda, I want to pick up on that point. I asked him during the primaries, Donald Trump benefited a lot from all these indictments. Where do you think this goes moving forward as these legal issues play out in the general election? Do you think that, we just saw in the latest polling, Joe Biden ticking up a little bit. Do you think that Donald Trump's legal issues will keep that trajectory for Biden?
Yeah, again, these things fluctuate, but right now it appears that there is voter fatigue among a lot of voters who are just tired of hearing about a lot of cases and the baggage that comes along with those cases. I think each case in front of the former president is very different because this one is not televised. Perhaps it's not really landing with a lot of people in the electorate because they're not able to see what's going on. But if the Fulton County case moves forward, or even the January 6th case, the federal case, moves forward before the election, that might be a different story. There was an interesting poll taken by AP since the start of this New York trial. And I noticed in it today that it said 47% of independents say they believe that Trump is unfit to serve if he is convicted, serve as president. So when you look at any metrics associated with the people in the middle, it sheds a lot of light on where people are right now.
And that's really interesting.
And that could be where he pulls into third party, right? And I do think, that everything that we're following at Middleton is the exact same thing, is that it is this conviction. If he gets convicted, then independent and moderates are saying, actually, I may not want to side with Joe Biden, but I don't want to be on the Trump train.
But Maria, he's been a candidate for nearly 9 years. Do you really think that, even a conviction, and I know the polling is showing it, but do you think people watching these trials, are they going to be swayed by the legal issues in months ahead?
The only thing I can point to is the red wave that wasn't. And that was because during the summer of 2022, you saw this January 6th committee come up and basically prosecute him in front of daylight of everybody that was happening. And that really influenced independent, moderate voters because they said, you know what, you can't break the law and you can't undermine the judicial system.
Yeah.
And that's one of the things that actually gave people the breath to say, wait a second, let me think twice. And it's why the red wave wasn't.
I don't think the convictions are going to matter so much because the left, really think, is pointing to these trials as basically trying to sully his name amongst independents
He's
to
done that
prevent
all
them
by himself.
to prevent them from doing that. Also to bleed him dry financially, so he can't come out and stroke checks to his own campaign, and of course take him off the campaign trail because Joe Biden obviously doesn't, do well out there on the campaign trail amongst the people. So they don't want Donald Trump out there with the juxtaposition.
The Biden campaign would take issue with that. But Hogan, thank you so much for joining us, Maria and Rhonda. Really appreciate your time here on Meet the Press Now. And still to come, voters are voting right now in battleground Pennsylvania. We're spotlighting the key primary races to watch, including a contentious House contest in Pittsburgh. It's put divisions inside the Democratic Party over the issue of Israel on full display. You're watching Meet the Press Now. Stay with us. Welcome back. If it's Tuesday, voters are voting somewhere. And today, that somewhere is the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania, which is hosting its House and Senate primaries. We're not expecting too many surprises in the Senate primary, with both Republican Dave McCormick and incumbent Senator Bob Casey facing uncontested primaries en route to a general election matchup that will be one of the most closely watched races this November. We've also got our eyes on some key House primaries. Moderate Republican Brian Fitzpatrick is facing a challenge from his right, from anti-abortion rights activist Matt Houck. If Fitzpatrick loses the primary, the seat could very well be in play for Democrats in November. And over in Pittsburgh, Democratic Congresswoman Summer Lee is facing a primary from Edgewood Borough Council member Bhavini Patel, largely over her position on the Israel-Hamas war. Lee is a member of the Progressive Squad in Congress and was one of the first lawmakers to call for a ceasefire and accuse the Israeli government of committing war crimes. I want to turn now to NBC's Ali Vitale, who was on the ground with the latest in Pennsylvania. Ali, it is so good to see you. I was on the ground in Pennsylvania myself last week. But you've spent some time in Pittsburgh with Congresswoman Summer Lee. And this race has almost become a referendum on her stance on the Israel-Hamas war. So what did you hear from her?
Yeah, a really fascinating moment of a litmus test on an issue that we talk a lot about in the halls of Congress. Congresswoman Lee actually just voted on that large package of foreign aid, which included a bill that would have sent billions to Israel. Lee voted against that. I asked her why. Watch.
The world has been calling for a ceasefire. The world has looked at the way this war has been conducted, and they've been concerned about that. And so have I.
Even with the $9 billion in humanitarian aid, that wasn't enough.
What we're hearing is that humanitarian aid is scarcely getting in.
Right.
It's scarcely getting in. It's not good enough to send bombs to Israel and send Band-Aids to Gaza, right? We need to stop the bombing. We need to stop the bleeding before we can even do anything else. It's just not helpful at that point.
And look, Gabe, certainly Lee is not the only congressperson or even the only Democrat who voted against the Israel aid piece of that package. Other Democrats will have to go home and tell their voters why they made that vote. But here it's a very specific community. This is a historically Jewish community. They have the Squirrel Hill neighborhood here, but you also have the Tree of Life Synagogue, a place that in just 2018 saw a gunman come in a hate crime and kill 11 people in a shooting here. It's certainly not far from memory, and it's something that voters will likely think about when they go to the ballot box. This race has really changed after October 7th, but it's important to also keep in mind that while this could be an early litmus test for the way that the Israel-Gaza conflict is playing in the minds of voters in an area where it's primed to be played out, this is also something where Summer Lee was facing a primary anyway before this. This just gave her opponent more reason to challenge her.
And Ali, before I let you go, speaking of a protest vote on the Israel-Hamas war, are we going to see a strong uncommitted vote here in Pennsylvania?
Not from Summer Lee. I made sure to ask that question, but she did tell me she respects the people who would vote uncommitted that way. And look, this is a concern for people on the ground here in Pennsylvania. We watched how close it was in 2020, days of counting ballots. And now, of course, we'll see how it plays out after the primary.
Ali Vitale, live for us in Pennsylvania. Ali, thank you so much. A lot to watch for, especially as this campaign ramps up. And thank you all so much for joining us. I'm Gabe Gutierrez, and I'll be back tomorrow with more Meet the Press Now. The news continues with Hallie Jackson right now.
Thanks for watching. Stay updated about breaking news and top stories on the NBC News app or follow us on social media.